for the District of New Jersey, where he was chief of the Economic Crimes Unit from 2014 to 2016. Last month, the General took steps to protect the physical and emotional well-being of New Jersey's law enforcement officers. And that is one of the reasons why we are so happy that he is here today to talk about his directive and the programs being implemented that tie so closely to our Suicide and Stigma Conference. The directive was the Officer Resiliency Directive, and it's New Jersey's resilience program for law enforcement officials. It is the first in the nation. Just think about that and the steps that the Attorney General has taken to protect the emotional and physical and mental well-being of our first responders. I think what the General saw was that since 2016, New Jersey law enforcement has seen about 37 instances of self-harm that resulted in death by suicide. And that talks to us about the importance of taking care of our emotional and mental well-being, particularly for those who are the first to respond, whether it's to deadly accidents, whether it's to scenes of violence, and thinking about the toll that it takes and the importance of destigmatizing the need to ask for help, and also not just asking, but having those resources readily available. So with that, I'd like you to please join me in welcoming the General.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. And Kathleen, thank you for that very kind introduction. When I talk about Bergen County, I sometimes tell people that I come from the center of the universe, which is the intersection of Route 17 and Route 4. But it's an honor to be here in Princeton, nevertheless. It's an honor to be here to talk about a public health issue that affects residents across our state, and it affects residents all around the country. And it's a public health issue that doesn't discriminate based on your education level or your profession. It doesn't discriminate based on age or gender. And it doesn't discriminate between whether you're rich or you're poor. And that's the issue of suicide and the issue of those mental illnesses or disorders that might contribute to suicide. And it's a quiet battle that many people face. And it's a battle that's often shrouded in stigma. A battle that can be isolating and all-consuming. A battle, as the name of this conference suggests, often takes place in the shadows. The fact that this room is filled with clinicians and hospital administrators, counselors, and community stakeholders, military leaders, I'm told, as well as law enforcement officials and education officials, not only serves to underscore the magnitude of this issue, but also gives me a degree of hope that we can and that we will bring this public health issue to the forefront and confront it head on. Now, as Attorney General, I've unfortunately witnessed this crisis and its casualties firsthand when it comes to our law enforcement officers. And there's a story that I want to share with you this afternoon. It's a story about a man that I met last year. His name was Pablo Santiago, and he was a Mercer County Sheriff's officer. If you know him or knew him, he was larger than life. And he had a smile that could light up a room. I've seen a number of pictures of Pablo since we first met. There's one of him at a back-to-school night in Trenton sitting in a barber's chair with a smile from ear to ear, the joke, of course, being that he was bald and had been bald for many years. There's another of Pablo from St. Patrick's Day in Trenton sitting in a patrol car with a green mustache on above his trademark smile. And there's another of him in front of a Christmas tree that I saw wearing a green suit, head to toe, that had a candy cane and Santa Claus pattern on it. He had a tremendous determination and aptitude to make others happy. And he showed that same determination throughout his law enforcement career. During his career, he was honored for his valor, and he was honored for his commitment to his community. And when I think about the types of law enforcement officers that we want to have out there protecting the public, I think that they should all be built in Pablo's mold, because they are dedicated, they are selfless, they are the first to step up to help and the last to step aside. And that's why it's with a sense of sadness that I mentioned Pablo's name this afternoon and I share his story. You see, the last time I saw him was on December 5th of last year. He wore his trademark smile, and we discussed doing some community outreach work together. Ironically, he was inviting me to go to a Sikh temple, my own faith, in Mercer County to do a homeless feeding with them. But just a few weeks after I met him, I was out to dinner with my family on the night after Christmas, after seeing a play in New York City. And I received a phone call informing me that Pablo had taken his own life that day. Now, his death shook me, and it shook everyone who had the privilege of knowing or even meeting him. And it shook me, but it also prompted me. It prompted me to acknowledge an important issue, one that is not often talked about, and that we are duty-bound to address, and that's the mental well-being of our law enforcement officers. Our cops are exposed to society's most difficult problems. Day in and day out, they witness such unimaginable and horrific horror. They see gunshot wounds. They de-escalate domestic disputes. They save people from car wrecks. They revive those suffering from addiction on the brink of death with Narcan. And each day they go home and they take off their badges and their uniforms. And we expect them to be okay. But in reality, they're not always okay. How can they be? They bring home those traumatic events that they've seen during that day with them each and every night. And yet, for too long, we've seen them wake up, put their uniforms back on, and go back to work without addressing that underlying trauma. And I think it's about time that we did something about it. It's about time that we address the mental and emotional toll that law enforcement officers confront in the line of duty. And as this conference is doing, it's about time that we take this issue out of the shadows. It's about time that we provide our cops with the tools and the resources that they need to cope with the stresses and the strains of their work. You know, we give them vests and we give them all sorts of gear to protect them from bullets and external threats, but we give them nothing to protect them from those internal dangers. And that's why last month I issued a directive implementing the New Jersey Resiliency Program for law enforcement. It is a first-in-the-nation program designed to assist officers in dealing with the day-to-day stressors of their work. It provides our officers with the physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual support that they need to do their jobs safely and effectively. Under this program, each law enforcement agency in our state will have a trained resiliency program officer, or an RPO for short. These officers will be tasked with responding to officers in need. And interaction with our RPOs will be confidential. And a vital part of this program is that if officers are uncomfortable going to their own department, they can go to any RPO in the state. They can go to members of the clergy who are RPOs. They can go to members of their PBA who are RPOs. The hope is that this freedom to go anywhere will remove the fear of adverse employment consequences, will remove the fear that officers might feel when speaking with someone from their own agency, because we know that there is still a stigma associated with officers seeking help. We know that some still in law enforcement incorrectly, not just in law enforcement, but in the public at large, still incorrectly view the need to talk to someone as a sign of weakness. And we need to counter that. We need to show that in times of need, a willingness to step up and seek help is actually a sign of strength. Our number one priority in New Jersey is to help cops overcome the stresses of any situation that they might encounter. This program has been put in place not to replace other resources that might exist out there, but to supplement them. And so when it comes to mental illness, when it comes to addiction, when it comes to suicide prevention, substance abuse, we've partnered with Cop to Cop, an organization whose peer counselors and licensed clinicians provide unique knowledge and expertise that can help our law enforcement officers in need. And so it's my hope that the resiliency program will work as a first line of communication that allows officers to unburden themselves, unburden any stresses that they might have or experience on the job before they become too overpowering for them to deal with. And that because of this program, I hope that officers will be able to find the support that they need and deserve. But I also want to take a moment to recognize that it's not just the officers who deal with the daily stresses and strains of their jobs. It's also their loved ones, their parents, their friends. So we're also committed to providing them with the tools through this program to deal with these issues as well. And to kick off this program, our RPO program, we're holding a 2-day summit on October 10th and 11th at the War Memorial in Trenton. During the summit, we'll have experts from all across the country on topics such as coping with traumatic stress, techniques for significant others to provide support to officers, and suicide prevention and awareness. This will be an opportunity to show how this program will benefit the law enforcement community. And I encourage those of you here this afternoon to join us for those 2 days, because if we could fill the War Memorial, we will take huge steps and make huge strides to stripping away that stigma. And I believe that this program can truly make a difference, that this program will have a positive impact on how cops take on responsibilities at home and at work, and that this program will change how cops view their families and view their jobs. And part of the reason I have these beliefs is because I've seen this program work. We piloted it at the Maple Shade Police Department in Burlington County. And during that pilot, each police officer in the department took the resiliency course over a 12-month period. And the family members of those officers were invited to participate as well. They were encouraged, in the words of the program, to spiral up and meet day-to-day adversities and challenges. To wake up in the morning, and rather than consider the stressors and the strains of their job, to ask themselves and consider one question: what am I thankful for today? They were taught that resiliency doesn't mean that you have to be able to conquer every adverse challenge. Rather, it means developing the tools needed and to gather the resources to buffer the effects of adversity. It means the ability to withstand, to recover, and importantly, to grow in the face of that adversity. And the feedback that we got from that program was so encouraging and remarkable. Many of the officers described the program as life-changing. And one spouse admitted to us after the program that she finally got her husband back. Now, I know that this is just one pilot and one police department, but I am absolutely confident that we can replicate this program across our state. Again, our goal is to improve the lives of our officers and their loved ones. Our goal is to combat any stigma associated with cops seeking help. And our goal really is also to begin a movement to make the physical and the emotional well-being of our law enforcement officers a top priority. And I believe that this program can and will become a national model. And I see great opportunity here, not just to limit it to law enforcement officers, but to share it with all first responders, to share it with prosecutors and others who deal with this tragedy and horror on a daily basis as well, to share it with anyone who protects the public, for that matter, who's willing to step up and put themselves in danger's way. Because all those first responders and all of those individuals deserve to have all the tools and all the resources available to them to cope with the stresses and strains of their work. We owe it to Pablo, and we owe it to all of our first responders. So I want to thank you for inviting me here to discuss such a critical issue. I want to thank you for showing that there are people out there who are willing to support us in combating the stigma and struggle of mental illness and suicide. And I hope to see you all on October 10th and 11th at our 2-day Resiliency Summit. Thank you very much for having me. I don't know what the program is, but I have a little bit of time since my next meeting got canceled, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Flyers for your conference are on our time.
And our flyers for our conference are out there. But again, I'm so encouraged, as I said in my remarks, by what I'm seeing this afternoon and by the response that I've seen from the law enforcement community as we strip away this stigma. The War Memorial holds 1,200 people, and we have 900 RSVPs. And so I'm encouraged because those RSVPs come from all across the state and from all different types of stakeholders. So again, I hope to see you there. It's a free conference. And we're working on ways to provide you free food, which is not always easy when you work for this state. And while I have a moment before we turn to the questions, let me also talk about what Kathleen was mentioning earlier, the other announcement that we made this morning. We're making available $20 million in funds to seed hospital-based violence interruption programs. I've set 4 priorities for myself as Attorney General, not to the exclusion of anything else, but 4 priorities to focus on during my time. 1 was the affirmative litigation, 2 is combating the opioid crisis, 3 is improving police-community relations, and 4 is addressing the problem of gun violence and treating it as a public health crisis. And to truly treat it as a public health crisis, we have to work on prevention, treatment, and enforcement. And in our prevention efforts and our treatment efforts, we're seeding $20 million to fund 9 hospital-based violence interruption programs. That notice of available funds went out today, and we look forward to your hospitals applying to set up these programs, because we have seen that they work, that they work in reducing the recidivism rate when it comes to gunshot wounds. I think at University Hospital, I'm told the recidivism rate is 25% for gunshot wounds. That somebody who walks in with a gunshot wound today has a 25% chance, if they don't die, to come back into the hospital with another gunshot wound. So these programs work in disrupting patterns of violence. So I encourage you to look at our announcement today to follow up on that notice of available funds and to help start these programs in the hospitals that you work at. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions while we have a few minutes. I could hear you if you just want to shout it out.
Can I ask,
Yeah.
the response officers, could you talk a little bit about who they are, how they're, thank you, the response officers.
Yep.
So how they're recruited, who they are, how folks who are interested in that.
So the resiliency program officers, or the RPOs, every department will have one fully trained by February 2021, right? And so that is our goal. They are selected by their departments, but we understood that even within a department, and even if you're going to different departments, there still might be a stigma. So cop to cop is another point of contact. There's a lot of chaplaincy programs that law enforcement departments have, and so chaplains can also be trained as RPOs. And then recently, in discussions with our PBAs and unions, we decided to open it up to union reps. That union reps have specially trained RPOs. And the model of training that we're using comes from the FBI and the Air Force. It's a military-based program that has been proven effective, and that's what we're adopting here. We're tweaking it a little bit. But again, it is something that we feel could be a model for the rest of the country. We have people attending this program from all across the country. Our colleagues from the NYPD are coming. You know, they are dealing with the same problem. They lost about 40 in that same time period in one department of about 36,000, as we lost about 37 in a state of 36,000 law enforcement officers. So it is a problem everywhere, and this is the first step, because the next step after this, which we want to counter and also deal with, is retired officers. Because there is an emotional toll that taking your uniform and putting your gun away and not having that routine takes on you. And so we realize that this is going to be an evolving process. We're going to move from a resiliency program from law enforcement to other first responders to retired officers. And we want to make as many RPOs available as possible. So if there are hospitals who want to partner with us in this, if there are other partners, the goal is to have as many points of contact in this system as possible. And the NYPD, I believe, is doing it in partnership with the hospital. Yes, sir.
With the announcement this morning, how did you determine which hospitals would be participating?
So it's incumbent on them to apply to participate, and it's going to be a competitive process. And so it'll be applying for the grant funding. And so I'm assuming every hospital has grant writers, and we'll work with them on putting their applications together. But I'd like to see it, all 9 of those grants used, with 9 successful programs, particularly where we have the issues. We have incidents of gun violence at a peak. Peaking in Atlantic City and Trenton has been a major hotspot, and then so too has Newark. So certainly in our big cities, I'd love to see those programs come up. But wherever we can seed them, I think it's important for us to do that. Ask the AG. We could talk about the prescription monitoring program. We could talk about the BME. We could talk about nursing, things that you want to bring to our attention that we're not doing well. Yes, ma'am.
I want to thank you for everything you're doing. It's so important that we do more for our first responders. So just to shift it a little bit, on the other side is there ever any thoughts you're providing them with more training? Very often the calls they're being called on are behavioral health
Yep.
issues. And how they respond to those calls can really make a difference in the outcome.
Yep.
So if they, and a lot of times when they're not responding appropriately, it's not because they don't want to, it's not because they're heartless and they're mean and angry cops.
They just don't know.
It's because they're not trained.
Yep.
And there's a lot of great programs out there, crisis intervention training, and when I've tried to get it in my county, what I always hear is, well, we can't, spare the time for that training because we're required to do so much other training. And when you really look at the numbers, the majority of their calls are behavioral health, so let's get them training.
Right. I think that's an excellent question. I think we are doing more to equip our officers with de-escalation tools. I think crisis intervention training is the gold standard. But unfortunately, as you are probably aware, it's a 5-day training, 40 hours, and it's usually done 20 law enforcement and then 20 other stakeholders, whether it's mental health professionals, hospital professionals, and it's done together. And I went through it, and I thought it was completely eye-opening to the point where I started paying for it when I was a county prosecutor, that departments who wanted to avail themselves to it could. You're doing things and exposing officers to dealing, putting the officer in the shoes of someone going through a mental health crisis or an episode. Something as simple as putting on earphones to replicate someone who's not able to process what you're telling them because they're hearing other voices or having some type of episode. So how can that officer then expect the individual to comply with his commands? It's not he's resisting. He's not not complying with authority. He just doesn't know. And so the program teaches de-escalation, the verbal judo. It is amazing. We've tried to boil it down into smaller chunks to do pre-service when folks are still in the academies, and we're trying to do it in service too. It really works best when it's in person, but we're trying to make do with video and some in person. I was just down in Miami, and I think they're doing an incredible job in mental health diversion in Miami-Dade County, and they have a judge down there. His name's escaping me now, but we sat with him for 2 days. The Chief Justice and I went down. And all of Miami-Dade is really, I think, crisis intervention certified. But that doesn't mean that every officer gets trained on it, right? It's those who are in contact with the public. So that's how you limit the costs and the expenses. You don't need to train, if you're a 150-person department, you don't need to train all 150 people. The folks who are on patrol, perhaps, or maybe one person on each shift, so when they're responding to a call, that you have someone who's CIT certified. But we are getting there, and I've seen it work, right? After I did the training in Bergen County, probably a week after it, a Port Authority cop responded to a call at the bridge and was able to talk somebody off the bridge, and he had just gone through the crisis intervention training the week before. So I am all for giving all of our officers more tools in their toolboxes to deal with their own issues and also to deal with issues that they might confront in their day-to-day duties, because it leads to safer interactions. The cost, the time is a challenge, but we are on that track. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Steph Albanese, Representative Vitale, we've met a few times.
Oh, yeah.
What's the update on the lawsuit with the opioid distributors? Purdue, I believe, was the main one that the state was a part of.
Yep.
Some states had accepted a settlement. New Jersey was not going to, as far as I
Yep.
could understand. It seemed a little complicated. So could you speak to where
Sure.
we're at with that?
Sure. I mean, a lot of the settlement discussions have some degree of confidentiality to them, but let's be clear on one thing. There is no settlement. Purdue filed for bankruptcy. There were some proposals out there. A number of states indicated a desire to accept those proposals. We did not. I am not comfortable with the proposal that doesn't hold the Sackler family accountable, that doesn't include an admission of liability, that doesn't properly fund treatment for the mess that they've caused, and that doesn't really disgorge their ill-gotten gains. When we deal with criminals, and I've been a prosecutor for the majority of my legal career, when I prosecuted drug dealers, we would go after their cars and their houses and any assets they have. Why should the standard be different from drug dealers who operate out of a conference room or a boardroom? And that's my goal. So only a settlement. You know, we're in the bankruptcy process. We also are not going to let them use that bankruptcy process as a shield. We just issued multiple subpoenas, I think 8 the other day, to track down their funds and financing. And listen, people say you're going to spend years in bankruptcy court. Let's also be clear about one more thing. They weren't paying anything in that settlement up front. And they were paying it to the extent they were going to pay it by selling off their assets and by stripping down Purdue Pharma and selling it off, and by selling foreign assets, and that was going to take years as well. So we're not giving up anything in the interim. And if there's a bankruptcy settlement that's forced upon us, then we'll be in a little bit of a different position, but we're not going to be, we're not going to sort of let them get away with it. So, anything else? Yes, sir.
More recently, there are issues around vaping and deaths
Yep.
associated with vaping. And I know the state of New Jersey, in terms of the marijuana, the use of marijuana, was thinking of legalizing marijuana in the state.
Yep.
Some of the vaping deaths were associated with those vaping marijuana as a product. What is your view about the issues around vaping, and what is the state doing about it?
So on the legalization question, I'll refer you to Senator Vitale's staff, because that'll be a decision made by our legislators and governor. And whatever they decide on that front, if they change the laws, we'll abide by it. On vaping in particular, a number of the deaths were associated with THC and other sort of accelerants or chemicals like vitamin E that were used to enhance the buzz or the high. The governor, I think it was a week and a half ago, convened a task force with a very short window, 21 days, to be chaired by the Commissioner of Health and other representatives, to look at this issue and to come up with recommendations, whether it's policy or legislative fixes to address vaping. What I did on that day is we dropped, I think, about 12 demands for information to companies, putting aside the THC and putting aside the other ills with vaping. The concern that we had was the marketing to minors. And so whether marijuana is legalized or THC or whatever the case may be, our laws still prevent the marketing of those tobacco products to minors, and our Consumer Fraud Act provides us with a pretty powerful tool. So using those tools, we're investigating these companies because there's enough there to suggest to us, given the flavors, given the type of marketing, given the history of the tobacco companies, that they know what they're doing. And so we are going to demand that information. We did from 12 companies, including one based here in New Jersey, and we'll follow that information wherever it leads. And if people are violating our laws by marketing to young people, we'll hold them accountable. So that's what we're doing on vaping. All right. Well, if not, thank you so much for having me. I look forward to talking to you in the near future again. Thank you.
So great talk, some phenomenal information, not just about the Officer Resiliency Program, which is starting off, but also really good news about the continued investment in gun violence and prevention, which we know as clinicians and providers of care is where we haven't seen enough funding. And it's very heartening to see a very big investment coming from the state to support efforts of clinicians in connecting patients they treat with needed resources so that they can prevent recidivism, that they can actually break a cycle of violence, and hopefully we're going to see some amazing models come out of whoever the 9 awardees will be.